Hi everyone. So just to warn you, this may be a little bit of a long TikTok. I don't have it scripted. I'm kind of going to be talking off the cuff. I'm not sure how long it's going to be. So if you don't want to stick around for discussion about leather culture and kink culture and all that, I'll understand if you just want to scroll by. So if you didn't see it, this comment was left on a TikTok that I posted, I believe it was 3 days ago, that basically alluded to there being a real cultural difference between straight kink and straight leather and queer quink and queer leather. And I know that it took me a few days to kind of like get back to this and address this, but I wanted to let the thoughts percolate a little bit and kind of decide on how I wanted to express what my thoughts on this were. So if we want to discuss the cultural differences between straight quink and leather and queer quink and leather, we kind of have to examine where both kind of grew out of and how they evolved, because those are different. Now, I'm not going to be spending a lot of time discussing the differences between someone who's quinky versus someone who's leather. There are differences there, and that is a very nuanced conversation. We're already going to be having a nuanced conversation today, so I don't want to muddle it beyond that. If we look at where leather culture kind of originated within the queer community, at least in the modern sense of leather, as we think about it, a lot of it kind of has its origin just post World War II. You had essentially what amounted to authoritarian style biker groups and biker gangs that there was like this mishmash of people coming back from the war, of men coming back from the war especially, that were used to that power structure, that were used to being around men, that discovered themselves in that time, that kind of thing. Like it's a whole cluster of things, right? But essentially a lot of the origins of what we consider current day leather community, as far as like the queer community is concerned, grew out of that. And then it went into the bars and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of this structure was also built as a self-defense mechanism. The clubs and bars really were safe havens, such as they were, when they weren't getting raided by the police and that kind of thing. So a lot of this culture kind of developed around then and then evolved. Now, out of that, you also had some notable works come out, like the Leatherman's Handbook, and the Leatherman's Handbook 2 by Larry Townsend. You had Tom of Finland come out around this time, various other artists and whatnot. Those are kind of like the two main ones, the two main names that kind of get talked about more often. And again, let's just put that on the shelf for now, because that is a whole other discussion that we can have. But essentially, the point that I'm getting at is a lot of leather culture, especially leading up to the 80s, developed out of a sense of need to identify, a sense of self, sense of self-preservation, sense of community protection. And then when the Stonewall riots happened, there's a lot of talk about, the trans individuals that were involved, the drag queens that were involved. The leather folk were also heavily involved in this. So when we talk about leather culture being, having its origins within queer history, within gay history, that is very literal, in the sense that a lot of the gay community that we know now really does owe some thanks to the leather community, in addition to thanks to the drag community, in addition to thanks to the trans community. The Leathermen have been around for a while. And I know that I make mention about the Leathermen a lot. Well, gay man, that's where a lot of my historical knowledge is, but let's not downplay the fact that leather women have been around for pretty much just as long. Now, on the flip side, let's talk about straight quink and straight leather. A lot of straight leather identity is, to put it lightly, let's just say borrowed from the gay community. So a lot of stuff that straight leather embraces and straight quink embraces directly comes from the gay community and has been adapted for them, for straight people. And I hold no ill will to that. I just want to be perfectly clear. I have no bitterness. I have no anger, no resentment, none of that. If people feel connected to this stuff, that's cool. But a lot of it really does come from a derived version of what was kind of copycatted from the queer community. And if we are also discussing literature and media, a lot of straight leather and straight quink, especially with regards to power dynamic, also comes from a series of books, I believe, the Gore books, which anyone who has been around for a while, you've probably cringed a little bit hearing me say that. I have my own opinions. Again, we're just going to put that on the shelf for now because that is a whole other conversation. My point is the straight quink and the straight leather has a different origin point. And as a result, how it evolved also differs. Now, as things have become more mainstream, as events have turned far more pansexual, whether they originated as being more homogeneously homosexual or more straight, there's a lot more overlap at this point. And as a result, the outward appearance of a lot of it can be very, very similar. And if you are not part of the community, it can look the same. However, when you are in it, when this is a dialect that you are used to, when this is a community that you are used to being around and that you can kind of have a better sense of what is happening and who's who and how people are sending signals and body language and all that kind of stuff that kind of wraps into culture, there is a very real noticeable difference between someone who is straight leather versus someone who is gay leather. For the most part, none of this is monolithic, none of this is universal. There are exceptions for everything. But at a core level, there is a real difference. And because it is so intangible, there's no one thing that I can specifically point at and say, that's the difference. Because it is a very vague concept. When we are discussing leather as a sense of identity, as a sense of community, there is no tangible element to it. There's the clothing, there's the literal leather, but there is a real cultural significance to that label. There is a real historical relevance to that label. So when I say that there is a real cultural difference between queer quink, queer leather, and straight kink, straight leather, I want to be clear, I'm not saying this from a perspective of judgment. But every now and then, there is definitely this realization of, oh, there really is like a cultural divide here to a certain extent. It's kind of like if you take two bars, right, that are, for all intents and purposes, they may as well be the same bar as far as safety, as far as welcome, as far as, you know, all the outward appearance stuff. However, one is a gay bar, one is a straight bar. The vibe is different. You might not even necessarily be able to pinpoint like what about it is different specifically, but culturally the two venues feel different. So I don't know if I'm really getting my point across. I hope I am. But essentially when I say that culturally speaking, there is a difference between straight leather and queer leather, that's kind of what I'm talking about. The feel is different. The vibe is different. If you go to a gay leather event, it's going to feel drastically different in a lot of ways to going to a straight leather event or a pansexual leather event. There's just a different vibe. There's a different feel about it. Anyway, at this point, I think I'm talking in circles. So I think that I got through everything that I wanted to address. If you've made it this far, thank you. I know this was a lot. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. I will answer them as best I can. I am not a historian, but I know people who are a lot more well-versed with regards to queer history and leather history as far as specifics than I am. So I will happily get as much answer and clarification that I can if there's anything that you need help with. Anyway, again, if you made it this far, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day.